Hey guys, welcome to TST Garage. I'm Bart. Today in the shop with me, I have a Kawasaki Z125 right here behind me. And in front of me on the table, you'll notice some shiny new parts that we've machined for this bike. What you see here are our spooled captive chain adjusters that replace the OEM chain adjusters that are installed from the factory in the swing arm of this bike. They are necessary to adjust your chain length, your wheelbase, and also they provide the means for locking down that adjustment. Now, that standard setup is very lackluster. It actually lacks the ability to retain itself within the swing arm when you remove the axle, causing a problem where everything kind of just pukes out on you, and then you need to employ at least a friend or some holding mechanism to hold all that stuff in place as you piece it back together. If you're doing rapid pit changes for the rear wheel, or for some reason you just want convenience in the whole system, I think our TST Industries captive chain adjuster set will really do the trick for you. Let's quickly go through what we have here. Everything 6061 aluminum, billet, CNC machined. The end caps that remain visible after installation are black anodized for a nice, durable, long-lasting finish. The inside, we didn't go into anodizing, but we did brush the surfaces. They're really nicely finished, well machined, high precision stuff. Now, I did mention that these are spooled. The Z125 does not come with any means of lifting the bike up on a paddock stand. We kind of make do by using platform or padded stands, but you'll notice if you use this method of standing up the bike on a paddock stand, you'll notice that when it's not locked down like we have it here in the vise on a lift, when it's not locked down like that, it can move fore and aft on you, and it causes an unstable situation that's not very safe if you just leave it standing like that for a while. A kid knocks into it, could knock it off, whatever. Not ideal. So we've developed a means of attaching a spool on each side of the bike to the swing arm via the spool boss that is machined into the end cap. And that way you could have either one of our TST Industries spools, or if you want to match some kind of color accents on your bike, we do have these available also. Either one is fine. You just mount them in, and then you have a means of standing up the bike on a paddock stand in a way that it locates itself and it won't come off of it. So it's much more stable and much nicer. I know these components are sought after on a lot of these bikes that don't come with spool bosses from the factory. So we decided to solve several problems with one hardware set, and that's what you see here. A little bit more of a detail here. Let's jump into the little graduation marks. We did inscribe many more steps into the adjustment block here so that you can have a finer resolution of seeing how far back or forward your axle is. Now, that remains visible through the window here, but if you're still using the OEM washer set on the swing arm, some of that will be obscured, and we'll jump into describing how to get around having that obstruction in the view during our installation. Now, if you've already upgraded your bike to have some kind of crash protection on the axles, like for instance our axle sliders that we provide for these bikes, you can just ditch these stock washers. They are not necessary. They are required for the stock setup, stock chain adjuster setup, but because of how we've designed our adjuster block that goes inside the swing arm, having a distribution of forces around the entire swing arm from the inside, this washer would be redundant. So the only reason for reusing it, if you're not using sliders, is so that you have a bearing surface on the outside of your swing arm and you're not mashing your nut and turning that nut into your nicely powder coated surfaces of the swing arm. We will show you how to perform the steps necessary for the installation. Let's just get started wrenching. All right, let's begin the process with the removal of the cotter pin from the axle on the nut side. I'm gonna use some pliers to bend the cotter pin legs out to unlock it. I'm going to retain the cotter pin for reinsertion later. I'm going to grab a 17mm socket for the nut side here, and then a 14mm tool on the other side. You could use an open-ended box or a socket. We can go ahead and take that nut all the way off, thereby leaving the axle completely loose. As the nut comes off, it releases this L washer. This is the washer I was talking about in my intro. If you're using our axle slider systems, I would say ditch this, it's redundant. If you're not, then I would just keep the washer just to take up the space on each side here of the axle so your axle doesn't hang out one side a lot more than the other. Now that the axle's loose, I've verified that it is moving back and forth. I'm gonna get my wheel suspended. Now, if you guys don't have any means of suspending your wheel in place, you can just take the wheel off. It'll just be one additional step. If you have a jack, you can use a jack. If you have a tire wedge from Pitbull, you can use that. I have these wood and foam blocks that I've been using for years. That seems to work for me pretty good. Just keeps my stuff in place as I work on it. All right, here we go. Axle's out, wheel's still in place. As you can see here, bleh, stuff just comes out. Kind of like just puking all over the place. Now to put this all back together and keep it all together, wheel align and the axle going in, it's just a pain in the butt. Plus, then you got to figure out, hey, do I remember which way this goes? Do these go to the top? Do they go to the bottom? Which way should I put it in? None of that guesswork with our system. This is very self-explanatory. Put it in. Tap it in with a mallet and it stays in place for you. Wherever you set the adjuster is where your adjustment stays. We have a captive screw here. Uses a 5mm Allen. Turn it clockwise. You're extending your wheelbase. Wheel goes back. When you move it counterclockwise, you're closing the length of that wheelbase, pushing the axle forward in the bike, and then it just stays there. So no matter what you do with the wheel, no matter what you do with the axle, it stays in place for you. Now, your system arrives in several chunks. You have the inner block, you have the end cap, and then you have the spools. The spools you see here are our TST industry spools that we've created specifically for this. This is an option if you've chosen the womet-tech spools. The installation is largely the same. I typically don't use any thread locking agents on these threads. We just tighten them pretty hard. I'll give you specs on torque a little bit later. This is how you will assemble these parts. They get fully tightened when we get on the bike. Now be careful as you turn this thread in, be gentle, make sure you don't cross thread it. Basically assemble it into the only threaded hole in the shorter side of the block, and then bring it closer, close this gap here. Make sure that at some point you get engagement between all these returns and their channels. Gentle and patient is really what makes this all work really well. All right, now I have this pre-assembled in a sense. What I'm going to do is mimic a close enough distance of adjustment here to the OEM setup. This just helps me with a good starting point for what I'm going to be doing. I'll put the axle through and see how close I got here. Now, I want this axle to be forward more than it was when it was perfectly adjusted prior to me disassembling it. So let's do that now. We will do a final adjustment after everything is installed. This is why I want the extra space. All right, this is looking pretty good here. I'm gonna do that for both of these new sets that I just got here and pre-assembled. All right, there we go. Now, your spools obviously go outboard, so if you're trying to put it in this way, that's wrong. Push it in until you get some resistance. Probably a better idea to do it one side at a time, but I'm already in place, so why not? Soft mallet is your friend in this process. We want to tap this thing in. Before we tap it in, make sure that this screw that is meant for expanding the system in place is loose. Make sure that you could still turn it by hand. And then we go to full bottom out. All right, now as I tap this thing and it doesn't make any vibration sounds anymore because it's fully seated, I will grab a 6mm Allen and turn in on this jamming screw and just give it a quarter turn to expand the system and lock it in place. We will finalize that locking a little bit later. For now, let's just get it held in place. All right, now that that's complete, let's grab our axle. If you are still using the OEM washers, then I would just start doing the reverse order of disassembly here, like so. I did mention the option of ditching these. If you do ditch the actual washer, you have the tick marks that we milled in, so those will be your indicators on the distance of your swing arm, your wheelbase. If you are replacing the actual OEM washer, then it does have a punch mark in at the top that corresponds to the punch marks on the swing arm itself. Now, if you are using our slider system for the axle, you would, instead of this whole setup, you would ditch this OEM washer, put your axle through the cup, through the boss, and then install it. And for these parts, for the actual slider system, I would recommend you guys watch that video separately before you install any of these components together. Just watch through that video real quick. I'm gonna give you some tips on how to install and tighten those things up. All right, let's just get back to where we were originally here with the axle and the OEM washer. Let's get our axle all the way through. All right, blocks go away. Other side washer goes on. Now the flat part goes on the bottom, from the bottom of the swing arm. All right, here we go. Let's grab the nut, get that spun on, and we can go ahead and get this a little bit tighter. Let's not go very, very tight just yet. I want to leave just a little bit of adjustability. All right, make sure that the wheel's forward most. All right, we have some play in the chain. We have actually a lot of play in the chain, and that's good. That's a really good starting point. So now I'm gonna tighten this up just a little bit, make it feel like there's a little bit of friction in there. Still tight, good to go. 5mm Allen. Now I'm gonna make sure that both sides are at the same tick mark. So I have 3 tick marks back and almost that on this side. Once again, turning the adjuster screw clockwise brings the adjuster back. And you can watch this happen. We are at 1mm of motion per 1 full turn of the screw. So we can go little by little until we are even between the 2 sides, where we get that chain a little bit tighter. Now, on these swing arms, the way they're made, as you go back farther, they are more and more bowed out. So as you bring it back, it will loosen. So you want to maintain some friction on this. I'm not gonna define to you guys what the proper tightness of your chain is. I'm gonna go to my liking, and I would invite you guys to tighten your chain based on the information provided on the sticker on the swing arm, or if you have a preference of your own, then I would suggest you guys just do it the way you do it. All right, this feels good to me. I have enough tightness to not lose the chain and enough slack to allow for suspension action. Grab my torque wrench, set it to 47 foot-pounds. All right, now that that's done, let's go ahead and put the cotter pin right back through here, through the axle, and then expand it so that you know that nut is not coming off no matter what. Expand the cotter pin and roll it back around the axle. If your cotter pin's been in and out several times, I suggest changing it. Those things are cheap. You can find them at auto supply stores. Probably 10 cents a piece. All right. Let's once again grab our torque wrench, set it to 18 foot-pounds, and using a 5 millimeter Allen, we are going to tighten our spools. If you are using the other alternate spools that we sell, the womet-tech colored anodized spools, I believe the Allen would be a 6. Now I'm going to grab my 6 handheld and make sure that my expanding screws are properly tightened. There's no torque spec that I have for you on this. This just has to be tight enough that it establishes preload on these parts and also on the threads. So I would say go tight and then half a turn past that, and then you'll be good to go. That's pretty much it on the installation. Let's take it down. And now we can come in with a proper fork style lifter, and our bike goes up and is secure. See, in just a couple of minutes, we can ditch these horrendous adjusters, make sure to recycle, and outfit our bike with spool bosses, spools, and a nice captive chain adjuster set that will make your tire changes really, really simple. If you are inclined to install the slider system also, it's a good time to do it all at the same time because it requires just one installation with a few extra steps. If you like what you see here, check out tstindustries.com. We have these parts ready to go, ready for you to order and enjoy. We also have some other parts that you may enjoy for your bike. Anything you have in your stable, we may have parts for it. Thank you for watching. Drop us a comment, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications or whatever you kids do. I don't know. Thank you for watching. See you later.